Queen Anne Boleyn remains one of the most scandalous and controversial queens in British history, a woman remembered not for the length of her reign, but for the extraordinary number of accusations leveled against her and the brutal speed with which her life was destroyed. Her rise and fall reads like a true crime case from the Tudor court, filled with ambition, whispered rumors, manipulated evidence, and a judicial process that seemed designed not to discover truth, but to justify a predetermined execution. Anne was born around 1501 into a family that was ambitious but not royal, and from an early age she was trained to survive and thrive in the dangerous world of European courts. Educated in the Netherlands and France, she returned to England polished, intelligent, sharp-tongued, and fiercely independent. These qualities made her captivating, but they also made her enemies. When King Henry VIII first noticed Anne, he was already married to Catherine of Aragon, yet determined to secure a male heir at any cost. Unlike her sister Mary, who had been Henry's mistress, Anne refused to become just another discarded woman. She demanded marriage, a crown, and legitimacy. That single refusal changed English history forever. Henry's obsession with Anne led to England's break with the Catholic Church, the creation of the Church of England, and years of religious upheaval. When Anne finally became queen in 1533, she stood at the center of a revolution, admired by reformers and despised by traditionalists. From the beginning, her position was fragile. She had replaced a beloved queen, and many believed her ascent was immoral, cursed, or illegitimate. When Anne failed to produce a surviving male heir, the whispers turned darker. Miscarriages followed, each one weakening her standing. At court, alliances shifted quickly, and Anne's sharp intelligence and temper earned her powerful enemies. By 1536, Henry's attention had already turned to Jane Seymour, and Anne was no longer an asset, but a problem that needed removing. What followed was one of the most shocking character assassinations in royal history. Anne was suddenly arrested and accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. The charges included incest, treason, and plotting the king's death. The sheer scale of the accusations was staggering. Anne was portrayed not merely as unfaithful, but as sexually deviant, manipulative, and murderous. Modern historians have long questioned how such crimes could have occurred under constant court surveillance. Yet in 1536, logic mattered little. The men accused alongside Anne were tortured or coerced into confessions. Timelines did not match. Alleged meetings took place when Anne was documented elsewhere, including periods following childbirth when she was physically unable to move. Yet the evidence was ignored. The trials were swift and merciless. Anne was held in the Tower of London, the same place where she had once prepared for her coronation. Witnesses described her as alternating between fear, disbelief, and nervous laughter, behavior later twisted to suggest guilt. The court appointed to judge her was stacked with men loyal to Henry or eager to secure their own positions. Anne's uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, presided over the trial, a chilling reminder that blood ties offered no protection when political survival was at stake. She pleaded her innocence with dignity, but the verdict was never in doubt. Found guilty on all counts, Anne was sentenced to death. Even the method of execution carried an unsettling symbolism. Henry ordered a skilled swordsman from France rather than using an axe, a gesture interpreted by some as mercy and by others as an attempt to appear magnanimous after orchestrating her destruction. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed on Tower Green. She wore gray damask and a French hood, prayed calmly, and forgave the king publicly. Her composure in death contrasted sharply with the monstrous image painted during her trial. After her execution, Henry married Jane Seymour within days, reinforcing suspicions that Anne's fall had been carefully planned. Yet the scandal did not end with her death. Almost immediately, doubts began to surface. Foreign ambassadors expressed disbelief at the charges. Courtiers whispered that Anne had been destroyed by false testimony and political necessity. Over time, the narrative of Anne as a wicked seductress began to crack. Instead, a darker picture emerged. A woman eliminated because she failed to deliver a male heir and had outlived her usefulness. The most disturbing aspect of Anne Boleyn's story is not the accusations themselves, but how easily they were accepted. Her enemies exploited deep-rooted fears of female sexuality, ambition, and power. A queen who spoke too boldly, argued theology, and challenged men was easily recast as dangerous. Incest, the most shocking accusation, ensured that sympathy would evaporate. It was character assassination perfected. Queen Catherine Howard stands as one of the most scandalous figures in British royal history. A teenage queen whose brief rise to the throne ended in disgrace, betrayal, and execution, leaving behind a legacy defined by dangerous secrets and ruthless political judgment. Her story is not simply one of youthful recklessness, but of a girl raised without protection in a predatory world, thrust into a position of immense power, and destroyed by a court that had no mercy for weakness or vulnerability. Catherine was born around 1521 into the powerful Howard family, one of England's most influential noble houses. Yet despite her prestigious lineage, her childhood was chaotic and poorly supervised. Sent to live in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, Catherine grew up in an environment notorious for lax discipline and moral neglect. Young girls were left largely unattended, servants came and went freely, and boundaries were rarely enforced. It was here that Catherine entered her first sexual relationships, including one with her music teacher, Henry Mannix, and later with Francis Derham, who may have considered himself her future husband. These early experiences would later be recast as crimes, but at the time they reflected a failure of guardianship rather than deliberate scandal. Catherine was still a teenager when she caught the attention of King Henry VIII, a man over 30 years her senior, obese, increasingly paranoid, and desperate for affection. By 1540, Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves had collapsed, and Catherine appeared at court as a lady-in-waiting. Her youth, beauty, and flirtatious nature captivated the king instantly. To Henry, Catherine represented renewal, innocence, and vitality, everything his aging body and fractured ego craved. He showered her with gifts, jewels, and titles, calling her his rose without a thorn. Within months, they were married, and Catherine was crowned Queen of England. But the crown sat on fragile ground. Catherine entered the marriage with secrets that could destroy her, and worse, she lacked the political awareness to hide them carefully. As queen, Catherine was isolated, inexperienced, and surrounded by enemies who resented the Howard family's sudden influence. Her past relationships, once known only to a few, became ticking time bombs. Even more dangerous was her behavior after marriage. Catherine began a secret affair with Thomas Culpeper, a favored courtier of the king. Whether their relationship was fully physical remains debated, but the secrecy alone was enough to constitute treason. Meetings were arranged at night, facilitated by Lady Rochford, the same woman who had helped bring down Anne Boleyn. At the Tudor court, secrets never stayed buried for long. In 1541, rumors of Catherine's past reached Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. He informed the king cautiously, knowing the explosive consequences. An investigation followed, uncovering letters, testimonies, and confessions from Catherine's former companions. Derham was arrested and, under interrogation, spoke openly of his relationship with Catherine before she became queen. Culpeper was also seized and confessed to meeting Catherine privately. The web tightened quickly. When confronted, Catherine reportedly collapsed in tears, insisting she had been coerced in her youth and begging for mercy. Henry, devastated and humiliated, refused to see her. The girl he had idealized as pure and unblemished was revealed to have a past, and worse, a present that shattered his fantasy. The political response was swift and merciless. Catherine was stripped of her title, confined to the Tower of London, and condemned by an act of attainder without a formal trial. In Tudor England, a queen's sexual misconduct was not merely immoral, it was treason. By engaging in relationships outside her marriage, Catherine was accused of endangering the royal succession itself. Her youth offered no protection. On February 13, 1542, Catherine Howard was executed at Tower Green, the same site where Anne Boleyn had died 6 years earlier. She was approximately 20 years old. According to witnesses, Catherine was terrified in her final hours, reportedly practicing how to place her head on the block. Her execution was swift, but the cruelty of her fate lingered long after. Culpeper and Derham were executed brutally weeks earlier, their deaths meant to erase any sympathy. Catherine was buried without ceremony, her grave unmarked. The scandal of Catherine Howard lies not only in her actions, but in the system that destroyed her. She was raised without guidance, married to a king old enough to be her grandfather, and punished for behaviors learned long before she understood their consequences. Her past was weaponized by political enemies, and her present mistakes were magnified into unforgivable crimes. Unlike other queens who plotted or manipulated power, Catherine barely understood it. Yet the Tudor court made no distinction between malice and naivety. Queen Mary I of England, forever remembered by the brutal nickname Bloody Mary, remains one of the most controversial and scandal-laden queens in British history, a ruler whose reign became synonymous with fear, fire, and religious obsession, yet whose life story reveals a far more complex and unsettling tragedy behind the blood-soaked legend. Born on February 18, 1516, Mary was the only surviving child of King Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Her early life was marked by privilege and affection, but that security was violently shattered when Henry sought to annul his marriage to Catherine in order to marry Anne Boleyn. Mary's world collapsed overnight. She was declared illegitimate, stripped of her title as princess, separated from her mother, and forced to serve in the household of her own infant half-sister, Elizabeth. This emotional trauma left deep scars. Mary grew up convinced that her mother had been cruelly wronged, that her own suffering was unjust, and that England's break with the Catholic Church was a grave sin that demanded correction. These beliefs would later shape her reign in devastating ways. By the time Mary ascended the throne in 1553, she was a woman hardened by years of humiliation, illness, and fear. Her claim to the crown was contested, and she came to power only after the collapse of Lady Jane Grey's brief reign. From the beginning, Mary saw herself as a divinely chosen instrument, tasked not only with ruling England, but with saving its soul. Restoring Catholicism was not a political preference for her, it was a sacred mission. But England had changed. Protestant ideas had spread deeply under Henry IV and Edward VI, and many of Mary's subjects were unwilling to return quietly to the old faith. Mary interpreted this resistance as heresy, rebellion, and defiance of God. What followed would define her legacy. Beginning in 1555, Mary authorized the systematic persecution of Protestants. Under her rule, around 300 men and women were burned at the stake for heresy. The executions were public, slow, and horrifying. Entire towns were forced to watch neighbors, clergy, and even pregnant women die in flames. These spectacles were meant to inspire fear and obedience, but instead they created martyrs. Accounts of the burnings spread quickly, immortalized in works like John Foxe's Book of Martyrs, which cemented Mary's reputation as a tyrant soaked in blood. Yet the scandal of Mary's reign was not limited to religious violence. Her marriage to Philip of Spain intensified public hatred. Philip was Catholic, foreign, and widely distrusted. Many English feared their country would become a mere extension of Spanish power. Rebellions erupted, most notably Wyatt's rebellion, fueled by anxiety over Mary's policies and her marriage. Mary crushed these uprisings mercilessly, executing leaders and imprisoning suspects. Her response reinforced the image of a queen who ruled through fear rather than consensus. Still, Mary believed herself justified. To her, mercy toward heretics was cruelty toward God. One of the most haunting aspects of Mary's reign was her desperate longing for a child. Producing a Catholic heir was central to her vision of England's future. In 1554, Mary believed she was pregnant. The court prepared for a royal birth. Bells rang, celebrations were planned, but the child never came. Months passed, and it became clear that Mary was suffering from a false pregnancy, possibly caused by illness or psychological trauma. The humiliation was immense. She experienced a second false pregnancy years later, deepening her despair. Without an heir, her entire religious project stood on fragile ground. As her health declined, her paranoia intensified. She became increasingly isolated, physically weakened by chronic pain and emotional anguish. Despite her ferocity, Mary's reign was not long. She died on November 17, 1558, at the age of 42, likely from influenza or cancer. But even her death was overshadowed by irony. The throne passed to her half-sister Elizabeth, a Protestant, undoing nearly everything Mary had fought for. The burnings stopped. Catholicism was once again suppressed. Mary's violent efforts had not saved the old faith. They had strengthened resistance to it. This outcome deepened the scandal surrounding her name. History remembers Mary the War as a queen who ruled through terror and failed completely in her mission. Yet modern historians increasingly ask uncomfortable questions. Was Mary uniquely cruel, or was she a product of her time? Her father, Henry VIII, executed far more people, but escaped a blood-soaked nickname. Why, then, was Mary singled out? Part of the answer lies in gender. A woman who exercised absolute power and violence was judged more harshly than male rulers who did the same. Another part lies in propaganda. Protestant writers had every incentive to portray Mary as monstrous, turning her into a cautionary tale. But the deepest scandal of Mary's reign lies in how trauma shaped her rule. She had been emotionally destroyed as a child, told she was illegitimate, cut off from her mother, and forced to deny her faith to survive. When she finally gained power, she used it not to heal, but to punish. Her burnings were not random acts of cruelty. They were expressions of a wounded conviction that suffering purified the soul. To Mary, fire was mercy. To history, it was madness. Queen Mary remains bloody, not only because of the flames she lit, but because her reign exposed how personal pain, religious fanaticism, and absolute authority can combine into something terrifying. She was not born a tyrant. She was shaped into one. And that transformation, slow, tragic, and catastrophic, is what makes her one of the most scandalous queens ever to wear the English crown. Queen Elizabeth I, forever remembered as the Virgin Queen, ruled England for 45 years without a husband. Yet her reign was saturated with rumors, whispered scandals, and relationships so politically and emotionally charged that they blurred the line between myth and forbidden truth. The mystery surrounding Elizabeth was not whether she loved, but whom she loved, how deeply, and what she sacrificed to keep power in her own hands. Born in 1533 to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth entered the world already marked by scandal. Her mother was executed when Elizabeth was just 2 years old, declared a traitor and adulteress, and Elizabeth herself was branded illegitimate. This brutal beginning shaped her entire worldview. She learned early that marriage, love, and ambition could destroy lives, especially the lives of women who stood too close to the throne. During her childhood, she witnessed the rapid rise and fall of queens, the executions of Catherine Howard and Anne Boleyn, and the terror of her sister, Mary the Firmfern's reign. By the time Elizabeth became queen in 1558, she understood that survival required caution, control, and secrecy. Publicly, Elizabeth cultivated the image of purity and devotion to her kingdom, declaring that she was married to England itself. Privately, however, her court was alive with emotional entanglements that challenged this carefully crafted image. The most famous of these relationships was with Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Dudley was Elizabeth's closest companion from the earliest days of her reign. They spent countless hours together, shared private jokes, and relied on each other deeply. Foreign ambassadors reported openly that Dudley behaved like a man who expected to marry the Queen. The scandal intensified when Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, was found dead at the bottom of a staircase in 1560. Although no proof ever linked Dudley to her death, suspicion exploded. Many believed the accident was no accident at all, but a convenient removal of an obstacle to the Queen's hand. Elizabeth never married Dudley, but she never dismissed him either. Their relationship remained emotionally intense for decades, leaving historians to wonder how much of it remained hidden behind palace walls. Elizabeth's refusal to marry was itself a scandal. In a world where queens were expected to secure alliances through marriage and produce heirs, her defiance unsettled Europe. Suitors arrived from across the continent, kings, princes, and dukes, but Elizabeth played them like pieces on a chessboard, encouraging hope, then withdrawing it. Some believe she genuinely feared pregnancy and childbirth, knowing how many women before her had died in childbed. Others argue she feared losing power to a husband who might dominate her rule. But rumors persisted that her refusal masked something more dangerous: forbidden relationships that could never be legitimized. One of the most scandalous theories surrounding Elizabeth concerns her later favorite, Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex. Young, arrogant, and impulsive, Essex was decades younger than the Queen and openly flirtatious. Their relationship was volatile, marked by arguments, jealousy, and emotional manipulation. Elizabeth slapped him in public during one argument, a shocking breach of royal decorum. Some contemporaries believed Essex saw himself not merely as a servant, but as something far more intimate. When Essex eventually rebelled against the Queen in 1601, it felt to many like a lover's betrayal rather than a political one. Elizabeth ordered his execution, proving once again that affection would never outweigh authority. Perhaps the most provocative and enduring scandal is the question of whether Elizabeth was truly a virgin at all. Her intense attachment to male favorites, her tolerance of intimate behavior at court, and persistent rumors of secret pregnancies fueled speculation for centuries. Some claimed she had borne a child in secret, hidden away to protect her throne. Others whispered that she was physically incapable of sexual relations, fueling cruel gossip about deformity or illness. None of these claims have been proven, yet their persistence reveals how deeply society struggled to accept a powerful woman who refused traditional roles. Elizabeth's sexuality became a battlefield onto which political fear and fascination were projected. Her body was not her own. It belonged to the state, to gossip, and to history. Even her death did little to quiet speculation. When Elizabeth died in 1603, unmarried and childless, the Tudor line ended with her. Yet she left behind something arguably more powerful than heirs: a myth. The Virgin Queen became a symbol of strength, independence, and national identity. But myths are often built to conceal uncomfortable truths. Elizabeth understood that mystery was power. By never fully revealing her private life, she controlled the narrative and kept rivals uncertain. The scandal of Elizabeth I lies not in proof of forbidden relationships, but in the deliberate ambiguity she cultivated. She allowed desire to circle her throne without ever settling, keeping men loyal, enemies guessing, and the nation focused on her rather than on succession. Mary, Queen of Scots, remains one of the most scandalous and captivating figures in British royal history. A woman whose beauty and charm ignited passion, whose personal choices invited suspicion, and whose life became inseparable from accusations of treason that ultimately led her to the scaffold. Born in December 1542, Mary became Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old, inheriting not only a crown, but a lifetime of danger. From the very beginning, her existence was political. As a Catholic queen in a Protestant-leaning Scotland and a legitimate claimant to the English throne, Mary was viewed simultaneously as a prize, a threat, and a weapon. To protect her, she was sent to France as a child, where she was raised in luxury and refinement at the French court. There, she blossomed into a striking young woman, tall, intelligent, multilingual, and famously beautiful. Her marriage to the French Dauphin, Francis, made her Queen of France at 16. But the fairy tale ended abruptly when Francis died less than 2 years later. Widowed and still a teenager, Mary returned to Scotland in 1561, stepping into a country transformed by religious upheaval and political hostility. From the moment she arrived, she was surrounded by suspicion. Her Catholic faith alarmed Protestant leaders, and her claim to the English throne terrified Queen Elizabeth I. Yet Mary's greatest scandals would not come from theology alone, but from love, passion, and the men she chose to trust. Her first marriage in Scotland, to her cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, was a disaster almost from the start. Darnley was handsome and charming, but also arrogant, violent, and dangerously ambitious. He demanded power he had not earned and quickly alienated the Scottish nobility. The marriage descended into jealousy and paranoia, culminating in one of the most shocking crimes of the century. In 1566, Mary's trusted secretary, David Rizzio, was brutally murdered in her private chambers by a group of nobles led by Darnley himself. Mary, heavily pregnant at the time, was forced to watch as Rizzio was stabbed repeatedly. The act shattered any remaining trust between Mary and her husband, and many believe it marked the moment her fate was sealed. Less than a year later, Darnley himself was dead. In February 1567, an explosion destroyed the house where he was staying, yet his body was found nearby, unburned and bearing signs of strangulation. The mystery of Darnley's murder remains unsolved, but suspicion fell immediately on James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, one of Mary's closest supporters. Even more scandalous was what followed. Within months of Darnley's death, Mary married Bothwell, a man widely believed to be responsible for her husband's murder. The marriage horrified Europe. Many believed Mary had been complicit in the crime or had allowed passion to override all political judgment. Whether Mary was coerced, manipulated, or genuinely in love remains fiercely debated, but the damage was irreversible. The Scottish nobility rebelled, painting Mary not just as an adulteress, but as a murderer queen unfit to rule. She was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI, and imprisoned. Her escape in 1568 led her to make one final catastrophic decision. She fled to England, seeking protection from Elizabeth de Mohars. Instead of sanctuary, Mary found captivity. For 19 years, she lived under constant surveillance, moved from castle to castle, treated as both a royal guest and a dangerous prisoner. During this time, her beauty faded, but her symbolic power only grew. To Catholics, she was the rightful Queen of England. To Elizabeth's ministers, she was the center of endless conspiracy. Letters were intercepted, coded messages deciphered, and plots uncovered, real and manufactured alike. The most damning was the Babington Plot of 1586, which allegedly showed Mary approving Elizabeth's assassination. Whether Mary truly intended Elizabeth's death or was entrapped by manipulated correspondence remains one of history's great unanswered questions. What is clear is that the English government wanted her gone. Mary was tried for treason, despite being a foreign queen, who argued she had no legal obligation to English law. The verdict was inevitable. In 1587, Mary was executed at Fotheringhay Castle. Even in death, she embraced drama and symbolism. She wore black to the scaffold, then revealed a red gown beneath the color of Catholic martyrdom. The execution itself was gruesome, requiring multiple blows to sever her head. When the executioner lifted it, her wig fell away, revealing gray hair beneath, shocking those who still imagined her as eternally youthful. A small dog hidden in her skirts emerged after her death, adding one final haunting image to her story. Mary's execution shocked Europe and stained Elizabeth's reign with blood. In death, Mary became a martyr, her legend growing larger than her life. But the scandal of Mary, Queen of Scots, lies not only in the accusations of treason, but in the way her personal desires were weaponized against her. She lived in a world where a queen's sexuality was political, where beauty invited danger, and where love could be interpreted as guilt. Unlike Elizabeth, who mastered emotional distance, Mary lived openly and passionately, and paid the ultimate price. Her life remains a cautionary tale of how beauty and power can become liabilities, and how a woman's choices, real or imagined, can be twisted into crimes. Mary was not merely a victim, nor simply a villain. She was a queen who loved deeply, trusted poorly, and became trapped in a web of ambition and fear spun by men who could not control her. That blend of passion and treason is why Mary, Queen of Scots, remains one of the most scandalous queens in British history, a figure forever balanced between romance and ruin. Mary, Queen of Scots, remains one of the most scandalous and captivating figures in British royal history, a woman whose beauty and charm ignited passion, whose personal choices invited suspicion, and whose life became inseparable from accusations of treason that ultimately led her to the scaffold. Born in December 1542, Mary became Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old, inheriting not only a crown, but a lifetime of danger. From the very beginning, her existence was political. As a Catholic queen in a Protestant-leaning Scotland and a legitimate claimant to the English throne, Mary was viewed simultaneously as a prize, a threat, and a weapon. To protect her, she was sent to France as a child, where she was raised in luxury and refinement at the French court. There, she blossomed into a striking young woman, tall, intelligent, multilingual, and famously beautiful. Her marriage to the French Dauphin, Francis, made her Queen of France at 16. But the fairy tale ended abruptly when Francis died less than 2 years later. Widowed and still a teenager, Mary returned to Scotland in 1561, stepping into a country transformed by religious upheaval and political hostility. From the moment she arrived, she was surrounded by suspicion. Her Catholic faith alarmed Protestant leaders, and her claim to the English throne terrified Queen Elizabeth I. Yet Mary's greatest scandals would not come from theology alone, but from love, passion, and the men she chose to trust. Her first marriage in Scotland, to her cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, was a disaster almost from the start. Darnley was handsome and charming, but also arrogant, violent, and dangerously ambitious. He demanded power he had not earned and quickly alienated the Scottish nobility. The marriage descended into jealousy and paranoia, culminating in one of the most shocking crimes of the century. In 1566, Mary's trusted secretary, David Rizzio, was brutally murdered in her private chambers by a group of nobles led by Darnley himself. Mary, heavily pregnant at the time, was forced to watch as Rizzio was stabbed repeatedly. The act shattered any remaining trust between Mary and her husband, and many believe it marked the moment her fate was sealed. Less than a year later, Darnley himself was dead. In February 1567, an explosion destroyed the house where he was staying, yet his body was found nearby, unburned and bearing signs of strangulation. The mystery of Darnley's murder remains unsolved, but suspicion fell immediately on James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, one of Mary's closest supporters. Even more scandalous was what followed. Within months of Darnley's death, Mary married Bothwell, a man widely believed to be responsible for her husband's murder. The marriage horrified Europe. Many believed Mary had been complicit in the crime or had allowed passion to override all political judgment. Whether Mary was coerced, manipulated, or genuinely in love remains fiercely debated, but the damage was irreversible. The Scottish nobility rebelled, painting Mary not just as an adulteress, but as a murderer queen unfit to rule. She was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI, and imprisoned. Her escape in 1568 led her to make one final catastrophic decision. She fled to England, seeking protection from Elizabeth de Mohars. Instead of sanctuary, Mary found captivity. For 19 years, she lived under constant surveillance, moved from castle to castle, treated as both a royal guest and a dangerous prisoner. During this time, her beauty faded, but her symbolic power only grew. To Catholics, she was the rightful Queen of England. To Elizabeth's ministers, she was the center of endless conspiracy. Letters were intercepted, coded messages deciphered, and plots uncovered, real and manufactured alike. The most damning was the Babington Plot of 1586, which allegedly showed Mary approving Elizabeth's assassination. Whether Mary truly intended Elizabeth's death or was entrapped by manipulated correspondence remains one of history's great unanswered questions. What is clear is that the English government wanted her gone. Mary was tried for treason, despite being a foreign queen, who argued she had no legal obligation to English law. The verdict was inevitable. In 1587, Mary was executed at Fotheringhay Castle. Even in death, she embraced drama and symbolism. She wore black to the scaffold, then revealed a red gown beneath the color of Catholic martyrdom. The execution itself was gruesome, requiring multiple blows to sever her head. When the executioner lifted it, her wig fell away, revealing gray hair beneath, shocking those who still imagined her as eternally youthful. A small dog hidden in her skirts emerged after her death, adding one final haunting image to her story. Mary's execution shocked Europe and stained Elizabeth's reign with blood. In death, Mary became a martyr, her legend growing larger than her life. But the scandal of Mary, Queen of Scots, lies not only in the accusations of treason, but in the way her personal desires were weaponized against her. She lived in a world where a queen's sexuality was political, where beauty invited danger, and where love could be interpreted as guilt. Unlike Elizabeth, who mastered emotional distance, Mary lived openly and passionately, and paid the ultimate price. Her life remains a cautionary tale of how beauty and power can become liabilities, and how a woman's choices, real or imagined, can be twisted into crimes. Mary was not merely a victim, nor simply a villain. She was a queen who loved deeply, trusted poorly, and became trapped in a web of ambition and fear spun by men who could not control her. That blend of passion and treason is why Mary, Queen of Scots, remains one of the most scandalous queens in British history, a figure forever balanced between romance and ruin. Queen Victoria is often remembered as the stern matriarch of an empire, a grieving widow dressed in black who ruled Britain for more than 6 decades. Yet behind this rigid image lay a woman whose obsession with control, emotional dependence, and private relationships created some of the most unsettling royal scandals of the 19th century. Born in 1819, Victoria ascended the throne at just 18, inexperienced and emotionally vulnerable, yet determined to assert her authority in a male-dominated political world. Her early reign was marked by intense reliance on trusted advisors, most notably Lord Melbourne, whose influence over the young queen alarmed politicians and fueled rumors of impropriety. From the beginning, Victoria struggled with separation anxiety, craving closeness and loyalty while fearing betrayal. That emotional intensity would define her reign and shape her private life in ways that shocked both her family and the public. Her marriage to Prince Albert in 1840 appeared to stabilize her, but it also revealed her deep need for dominance and possession. Victoria adored Albert with near-obsessive devotion, yet she also resented his growing authority in political and domestic affairs. Their relationship was passionate, volatile, and intensely private. Victoria's journals reveal overwhelming desire, jealousy, and emotional dependence, traits rarely associated with the reserved image she projected. Albert became her emotional anchor, administrator, and moral compass, and when he died suddenly in 1861, Victoria's world collapsed. His death did not simply make her a widow. It transformed her into a woman consumed by grief, isolation, and an iron grip on power. Victoria withdrew almost entirely from public life, refusing to attend state events, avoiding London, and allowing the monarchy's popularity to plummet. Yet while she retreated physically, her control tightened. She ruled from behind palace walls, issuing commands, interfering in politics, and punishing those who challenged her authority. Her prolonged mourning shocked the nation, but it also revealed something darker. Victoria used her grief as both shield and weapon. She demanded constant sympathy, absolute loyalty, and unquestioning obedience from her household and ministers. Those who failed to meet her emotional needs were dismissed or humiliated. During this period, her relationship with John Brown, a Scottish servant, ignited one of the most scandalous chapters of her life. Brown was fiercely loyal, physically imposing, and unapologetically informal with the Queen. He addressed her bluntly, challenged her moods, and accompanied her constantly. Their closeness caused outrage within the royal family. Courtiers whispered that Brown slept near her chambers, controlled access to her, and wielded influence far beyond his station. Some even believed they had married secretly, referring to Victoria mockingly as Mrs. Brown. While no proof of a romantic relationship exists, the emotional dependency was undeniable. Victoria defended Brown obsessively, rewarding him with gifts, honors, and protection, while ignoring the discomfort of her children and advisors. When Brown died in 1883, Victoria was devastated, commissioning statues, preserving his belongings, and instructing that his image be buried with her. The pattern repeated later in her life with Abdul Karim, a young Indian servant known as the Munshi. Victoria elevated him rapidly, teaching him English, granting him access to her private correspondence, and trusting him with personal matters. The royal household was horrified. Karim was viewed as manipulative, ambitious, and socially inappropriate. Yet Victoria dismissed all criticism as prejudice. She insisted on absolute loyalty to him, forcing her children and courtiers to accept his presence. Her obsession with Karim strained family relationships and deepened the perception that the queen ruled based on emotional attachment rather than reason. Even after her death, Edward VII ordered Karim expelled and erased from court records, suggesting how threatening his influence had become. Victoria's need for control extended beyond personal relationships into the lives of her children. She dominated their marriages, interfered in their households, and punished independence with emotional withdrawal. Her daughters were smothered with expectations, while her sons were criticized relentlessly. Victoria viewed her children not as individuals, but as extensions of her will, tools to project her influence across Europe. This controlling nature was mirrored in her approach to empire. Under her reign, Britain expanded aggressively, consolidating colonial power, while she adopted the title Empress of India. Victoria embraced imperial authority as compensation for personal loss, clinging to dominance as a way to impose order on a world that had taken Albert from her. Her widowhood became an identity, one she refused to relinquish even as decades passed. Critics argued that she used mourning to avoid accountability, while supporters saw her as a symbol of endurance. Both interpretations contain truth. Victoria's scandal lies not in sexual impropriety, but in emotional excess and authoritarian attachment. She demanded devotion while offering little freedom, punishing dissent with exile, and favoring those who fed her need for reassurance. By the time she died in 1901, Victoria had shaped Britain into a global power, but at great personal and institutional cost. The monarchy survived her reign, but it was forced to evolve, learning that isolation and emotional absolutism threatened its legitimacy. Queen Victoria was not merely a grieving widow. She was a ruler who replaced intimacy with control and love with possession. Her obsession with loyalty, dominance, and emotional dependency reveals a deeply human vulnerability beneath the crown. That tension between grief and power is what makes her one of the most scandalous queens in British history, not because she broke rules publicly, but because she ruled privately through attachment, fear, and an unyielding need to command both hearts and empire. Wallis Simpson was never crowned queen, yet no woman in modern British history wielded more disruptive power over the monarchy than she did. She was the American divorcee whose relationship with King Edward VIII triggered a constitutional crisis, shattered tradition, and forced a reigning monarch to choose between love and the crown. Her story is one of ambition, desire, and scandal, but also of a rigid royal system unable to accommodate a woman who refused to conform. Born Bessie Wallace Warfield in 1896 in Pennsylvania, Wallace came from modest beginnings and grew up acutely aware of social hierarchies. She learned early that charm, wit, and strategic relationships were tools for survival. After 2 marriages that ended in divorce, she arrived in British high society as an outsider American, outspoken, and already carrying the stigma of marital failure in a society obsessed with respectability. When she met Edward, Prince of Wales, in the early 1930s, she was still married to her second husband, Ernest Simpson. Edward, accustomed to obedience and admiration, was immediately captivated by Wallis's sharp tongue, confidence, and refusal to fawn over his royal status. Unlike aristocratic women trained to flatter and submit, Wallis challenged him, mocked him, and offered emotional intimacy that Edward had long craved. Their bond intensified rapidly, crossing boundaries that alarmed courtiers and politicians alike. When Edward became king in January 1936, Wallis was no longer merely a mistress. She was the center of his emotional world. The problem was not just that Wallis was divorced, it was that she was divorced twice, with 2 living ex-husbands, making her utterly unacceptable as queen under the doctrines of the Church of England, of which the king was the supreme governor. Edward's determination to marry her placed the monarchy on a collision course with government, church, and public morality. As rumors spread, British newspapers initially remained silent, but foreign press openly reported the affair, humiliating the establishment. Edward's infatuation became impossible to disguise. He confided in Wallis, relied on her judgment, and allowed her influence over state matters, alarming ministers who feared she was politically reckless or even dangerous. Whispers circulated that Wallis had connections with Nazi officials, that she was manipulative, or that she sought power rather than love. While many of these claims were exaggerated or unfounded, they reflected the fear she inspired. Wallis represented a direct challenge to the image of monarchy as moral, stable, and above scandal. In December 1936, the crisis reached its peak. Edward announced his intention to marry Wallis, proposing either a morganatic marriage or defiance of convention. The government refused. Faced with the choice between crown and woman, Edward abdicated after less than a year on the throne, delivering his now famous broadcast in which he declared he could not continue as king without the help and support of the woman I love. It was an unprecedented abdication in peacetime, one that stunned the world. Wallis, vilified by the press, was portrayed as a seductress who had destroyed a king and destabilized a nation. Edward's younger brother became George Thicksocks, and the monarchy narrowly avoided collapse. Wallis married Edward, now Duke of Windsor, in 1937, but the price of their love was exile. She was never granted the title of Her Royal Highness, a deliberate insult enforced by the royal family, particularly Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother. The Windsors lived mostly abroad, cut off from meaningful royal duties. Edward's resentment toward his family grew, while Wallis bore the blame for a sacrifice that increasingly appeared one-sided. Their marriage, often romanticized as a great love story, was complex and deeply flawed. Edward was emotionally dependent, submissive, and needy, while Wallis was pragmatic, sometimes cruel, and reportedly ambivalent about becoming queen at all. Some biographers argue she never intended Edward to abdicate and was horrified by the outcome, while others believe she enjoyed the power she held over him. During World War II, further scandal erupted when the Windsors were accused of Nazi sympathies. Documents later suggested that German officials believed Edward could be reinstated as king if Britain fell. Wallis's alleged connections to German diplomats fueled suspicion, though definitive proof of treason remains elusive. Nevertheless, the couple's reputation never recovered. After the war, they lived a life of privilege without purpose, hosting parties, cultivating celebrity friendships, and clinging to relevance. Wallis became increasingly bitter, her sharp wit hardening into cruelty, her glamour masking loneliness. Edward remained devoted to her until his death in 1972, but the emotional cost of abdication was evident in his lingering sense of loss and resentment. Wallis outlived him by 14 years, spending her final years isolated, ill, and largely forgotten, her fortune dwindling and her autonomy questioned. In the end, Wallis Simpson was neither a simple villain nor a romantic heroine. She was a woman who exposed the fragility of monarchy by refusing to disappear quietly. Her existence forced Britain to confront whether its crown was an institution of duty or a prison of tradition. She did not rule, yet she reshaped history more decisively than many queens. The scandal of Wallis Simpson lies not only in what she took a king's crown, but in what she revealed, that love, obsession, and personal desire could still overpower centuries of royal authority. She paid for that revelation with exile and infamy, but the monarchy was never quite the same again. Queen Camilla's journey from the most vilified woman in Britain to queen consort is one of the most dramatic reputation reversals in modern royal history, a story shaped by scandal, endurance, and the slow recalibration of public memory. For decades, Camilla Parker Bowles was known primarily as the other woman, the figure blamed for the collapse of a fairy tale marriage and the unhappiness of Princess Diana. Born Camilla Rosemary Shand in 1947 into an upper-middle-class family with strong social connections, she was never destined to be royal, nor did she initially seek the crown. She met Prince Charles in the early 1970s, and from the beginning, their connection was unmistakable. They shared humor, intellect, emotional compatibility, and a sense of ease that Charles rarely found elsewhere. Yet Camilla was deemed unsuitable as a royal bride. She lacked aristocratic pedigree, was considered insufficiently virginal by palace standards, and most importantly, was not seen as malleable enough for the role of future queen. Charles was sent away to naval duty, and Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles, while Charles eventually married Diana Spencer, a young woman carefully chosen to fit the monarchy's expectations. What followed was one of the most public marital failures of the 20th century. Charles and Diana's marriage quickly deteriorated under the pressure of incompatibility, media intrusion, and emotional isolation. Charles returned emotionally to Camilla, and their long-standing bond resumed behind palace walls. When the truth emerged, the public reaction was brutal. Camilla became the embodiment of betrayal, painted as cold, manipulative, and morally corrupt. Tabloids depicted her as the woman who broke Diana's heart, ignoring the deeper failures of the institution that forced a deeply mismatched marriage in the first place. The infamous leaked phone calls of the early 1990s, exposing the intimacy between Charles and Camilla, cemented her status as a national villain. Even as Charles admitted to the affair publicly, it was Camilla who bore the greater share of hatred. She was mocked relentlessly, her appearance dissected, her character flattened into caricature. When Diana died in 1997, the hostility intensified. To many, Camilla became symbolically linked to Diana's suffering, regardless of the complex realities of the marriage. For years, she lived in near hiding, avoiding public events and enduring threats, ridicule, and isolation. Yet what distinguishes Camilla's story is not scandal alone, but persistence. Unlike other royal figures destroyed by controversy, Camilla did not disappear. Supported unwaveringly by Charles, she slowly re-emerged, cautiously and deliberately. The palace embarked on one of the longest image rehabilitation campaigns in royal history, though it was Camilla's own behavior that ultimately shifted perception. She did not attempt to compete with Diana's glamour or popularity. Instead, she leaned into understatement, humor, and consistency. She took on charitable work quietly, particularly focusing on literacy, domestic violence, and sexual assault awareness, causes that required empathy rather than spectacle. Over time, her authenticity began to resonate. She was never polished, never idealized, and never pretended to be perfect. That honesty, once a liability, became her strength. When Charles and Camilla married in 2000, the event was deliberately modest, signaling awareness of public sensitivity. She did not take the title Princess of Wales out of respect for Diana's memory, choosing instead to remain Duchess of Cornwall. This restraint played a crucial role in softening public resistance. As years passed, Camilla's presence beside Charles became normalized, She offered him emotional stability, practical support, and a sense of partnership he had long lacked. Insiders often noted that Charles was calmer, more confident, and more effective with Camilla at his side. When Queen Elizabeth II, shortly before her death, publicly expressed her wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort upon Charles's accession, it marked a historic moment of institutional acceptance. It was also a signal to the public that resistance was no longer expected. When Charles became king in 2022, Camilla's transformation was complete in title, though not without lingering controversy. Critics argued that she could never escape her past, while supporters pointed out the cruelty of denying a woman redemption after decades of loyalty and service. As Queen Consort, Camilla has continued her quiet approach, avoiding overt displays of authority and focusing instead on support and continuity. Her role is deliberately non-dominant, shaped by awareness of the monarchy's fragility in the modern age. The scandal of Queen Camilla is unique because it unfolded in real time, under relentless media scrutiny, and because it forced the public to confront uncomfortable truths about love, marriage, and institutional hypocrisy. She did not overthrow tradition through rebellion, but survived it through endurance. Her ascent challenges the idea that royal narratives are fixed or moral absolutes. Camilla was neither the villain tabloids created, nor the saint later portrayals attempt to construct. She was a woman who loved a man the institution had denied her, endured decades of vilification, and emerged with her dignity intact. From other woman to Queen Consort, her story is less about victory than survival. It reveals a monarchy capable of evolution, and a public capable, however slowly, of forgiveness. In that sense, Queen Camilla's greatest scandal may be that she proved time, patience, and authenticity can outlast even the most entrenched public hatred. Queen Caroline of Ansbach, remembered as one of the most politically astute and intellectually formidable consorts in British history, was a queen whose influence behind the throne reshaped the monarchy and fueled scandals that exposed the delicate balance of power, marriage, and public perception. Born in 1683 in the German Principality of Ansbach, Caroline was raised with rigorous education, an unusual privilege for women of her time. Fluent in multiple languages, well-versed in philosophy, politics, and the arts, she cultivated a sharp mind and confident presence that would define her life. In 1705, she married George Augustus, the future George II, in a union that was both politically advantageous and personally significant. Caroline's intellect and political insight quickly became apparent to her husband, who relied on her counsel during his rise to power, yet her influence was a double-edged sword. While George trusted her judgment, his reliance on her irritated ministers and courtiers who were unused to a queen exercising such authority. Her power behind the throne was unmatched, but it made her a target for gossip, jealousy, and intrigue. Caroline's keen understanding of politics allowed her to guide George through turbulent times. She helped manage relationships with Parliament, advised on foreign alliances, and acted as an intermediary in disputes among ministers. Her influence was so extensive that some contemporaries accused her of controlling the king entirely, a claim that scandalized the public and the court alike. The court's discomfort with her authority was compounded by Caroline's assertiveness in private matters. She openly criticized George's infidelities, admonished his favorites, and demanded that her household reflect her standards of decorum and loyalty. While she was politically supportive, she did not tolerate disrespect or betrayal in her personal life, a stance that fueled rumors of temper, manipulation, and even vengeful plotting. One of the most persistent scandals involved her strained relationship with George's mistress, Henrietta Howard, and later with other women who threatened Caroline's influence. She leveraged her intellect, social grace, and alliances within court to marginalize rivals, ensuring that her position remained secure. At the same time, Caroline was an advocate for her children, particularly Frederick, Prince of Wales, and Princess Anne. She sought to protect them from political and personal dangers, guiding their education and social positioning. Her concern for Frederick became a source of tension when he grew older and resisted her authority, leading to conflicts that courtiers often exaggerated into tales of familial discord and public scandal. Caroline's capacity for diplomacy extended beyond her family and husband. She corresponded with leading intellectuals of her time, including philosophers and scientists, supporting the arts, education, and reformist ideas that advanced both cultural and political agendas. Her patronage made her a respected figure among progressives, but it also fed speculation that she wielded power in ways that overstepped traditional female roles. Public perception of Caroline was complicated. On the one hand, she was admired for her intelligence, dignity, and cultivation. On the other, she was criticized for her ambition and influence over George II, particularly because such involvement was deemed improper for a queen consort. Cartoons, pamphlets, and gossip painted her alternately as a wise guide or a domineering figure, depending on the political climate. Her death in 1737 marked the end of an era in which a queen could wield behind-the-scenes authority without overtly challenging the throne. Caroline left a legacy of cultural enrichment, political intervention, and personal integrity, demonstrating that a queen could be both a supporter of monarchy and an active agent in governance. Her scandals, largely fueled by perceptions of overreach and envy, reflect the gendered lens through which power was assessed in 18th century Britain. Caroline of Ansbach's life illustrates the complex dynamics of influence, marriage, and public scrutiny. She mastered the subtle art of political intervention while navigating the precarious expectations of a court and country that were suspicious of female authority. The story of her power behind the throne is not one of public defiance or overt scandal in the conventional sense, but rather a continuous negotiation of influence and perception, a demonstration that a queen could wield authority quietly, effectively, and with lasting impact. In a world where women were expected to be ornamental and passive, Caroline defied expectations through intellect, judgment, and resolve. Her life was a testament to the idea that the most enduring royal influence is not always visible from the throne, but exercised in the corridors of council, the shaping of heirs, and the orchestration of courtly and political networks. It is this combination of power, wisdom, and subtle scandal that makes Caroline of Ansbach one of the most fascinating queens in British history. A woman who navigated the treacherous waters of monarchy with intelligence and tenacity, ensuring her voice was heard even when her authority was questioned or misunderstood. Her story demonstrates that scandal is not always a product of moral failing or sensational acts, but sometimes emerges from the audacity of intelligence and influence exercised by a woman in a patriarchal society. Caroline's life reminds us that the hidden hands behind the throne can shape history just as decisively as those who sit upon it, and that enduring power often requires resilience, strategy, and the courage to assert one's presence in a world determined to limit female authority.